What's going on YouTube? It's Teach back again with another video, and today I am giving you my tier ranking and ultimately my quarterback rankings heading into the 2022-2023 NFL season. Hopefully you all are excited, and if you do enjoy today's video, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me and my channel out a ton. If you're new around here, want to see more sports content in your life, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And I'm not trying to overall predict the future. Tell me if you want to see a 3 years out quarterback rankings. I will definitely do that, but tell me where you would rank the quarterbacks heading into next season with the caveat and with the idea in mind that you're ranking these quarterbacks for one season, just to have them next year. And I'll kind of validate why I think the way I do, but I'd love to have your thoughts down below in the comments section. It's just a catalyst for a conversation. So we'll go ahead and start pretty quickly with, a couple of the quick things we can, have discussed here. So we'll start with, I'm trying to find him on here, but there's only going to be one quarterback that goes in the retired bin, and it's Ben Roethlisberger. For whatever reason, there he is. As a Steelers fan, you would think I'd be able to find him pretty quickly. We won't touch Dwayne Haskins in this, but rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins. Obviously, tragic for anybody to lose his life, especially as early as he did. But let's go ahead and start with the rookie quarterbacks, and then we're going to add one more into that category. And a large part of this is just because we don't know. And this is going to come down to the scheme that they're being put into, the surrounding supporting cast, what wide receivers are these guys thrown to, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to basically, for right now, just tier these in the ranking that I had these guys. And it goes a little something like that. And then I'm going to throw one more guy in here, and that's going to be Trey Lance. Having a hard time finding him, but the reason I'm going to put Trey Lance in this rookie tier is because we saw him for 2 games last year, and he in and of himself is a bit of an unknown commodity when it comes to being a starting quarterback. Finally located Trey Lance. We'll put him up towards the top because if he was in this year's draft class, he would have been my number 1 quarterback. So makes a lot of sense, but we just don't know. And given how raw he was coming out of North Dakota State, it's hard to put a real, ranking on him. And, for context, you'll see on the left side, I put some extra, details into each of these tiers to kind of give you an insight of how I would rank and tier these quarterbacks. If Lance isn't in that rookie quarterback tier, I would have to put him in that average kind of, we don't know, young player, hasn't taken that next step yet. So the next easiest category to get out of the way is the elite quarterback tier. And, I think if you were to ask me, Patrick Mahomes would still be, nobody screenshot that and take me out of context there, but Patrick Mahomes, in my eyes, would still probably be, the best quarterback in the league in my eyes. And, I'll have him followed suit by a guy who's now, back-to-back MVP winner, Aaron Rodgers. If you think Rodgers is the best quarterback doing it right now, I'm not going to argue with you. And then, of course, there's the argument for the GOAT. Is he still the best quarterback? I know a lot of people, myself included, maybe there's an argument that he should have been the MVP last year. It was certainly close between him and Rodgers, but I think nobody's going to argue with those 3, so I don't want to take a whole lot of time and, talk about why those 3 are in the elite tier. 2 more guys we'll throw in this top tier, and with that, if I can find him, it's going to be Josh Allen. Now, I'm a huge Josh Allen fan. I'm kind of thinking about doing some, grading of old draft classes and kind of going back and grading picks. Now that we have a handful of players 3-4 years deep in their career, obviously more than a handful of players, we have an entire draft class 3 or 4 years, and it's kind of interesting to go back. And now that we have enough data to really grade and evaluate those picks, let's do it. I think that's a fun idea. Maybe we'll do that here pretty soon, and we might do it with some of my mocks that I had before I had this channel. But going to that topic, I had Josh Allen as my number 1 player in that draft class. I had him as the number 1 pick where I thought the Browns should have gone. Now, that being said, if Allen gets drafted by Cleveland, does he become the same player? Probably not. So it's a good situation he found himself in, and again, that's why it's so hard to grade where these rookie quarterbacks stand. And then the last quarterback we'll put onto this elite tier, and it's obviously tough to talk about Deshaun Watson with everything that's going on off the field, and also just what that implies is his character, kind of becomes off of that. So I'm not going to talk about the off-field stuff. And again, last time we saw Deshaun Watson, he was without a doubt a top 5 quarterback. The Texans still somehow only finished 4-12 that year, but the dude's mobile, big arm, and he has what it takes. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and the fact he's so young. There's a reason Cleveland paid him as much as they did. Now they're kind of paying for that down the road, but also with their relationships with other teams, I think. But fully guaranteed, big deal, and it's, for good reason. When he's playing, he's a top 5 caliber quarterback. Now let's have some fun. Now we'll go, quarterback by quarterback, and Russell Wilson, he'll probably be the top of this, really good with sprinkles of elite. And Russell Wilson could certainly put himself back in that elite category. Last year is obviously kind of tough to judge because you have the finger mallet injury, and Seattle is kind of on this continuous decline of the last, maybe half decade or so. So his ecosystem was getting worse around him. His health wasn't great. Where is Russell Wilson legitimately, right? And, now week 1 game against Indianapolis, people are immediately, crowning him as a way too early MVP candidate, which, that's fun to talk about at that time of the year. But, he can get back in that elite category in my eyes. And, maybe he or surpasses a Deshaun Watson, maybe a Josh Allen, or maybe, Rodgers takes a step back without Devontae. I think there's certainly some opportunity for Russell Wilson because he's stepping into a good situation in Denver. Nathaniel Hackett, I think, is a good offensive mind. Russell Wilson can certainly put himself in the elite tier, but given where he was last year, I'm going to put him in the really good with sprinkles of elite. And also for context, I think if you have a quarterback in the top 2 tiers, elite, obviously you can win a Super Bowl. Really good with sprinkles of elite, and we'll talk about it with a guy who's going to be on this tier in just a little bit, but I think those are the 2 tiers where you feel pretty confident about your chances of being a Super Bowl contender. And then you can win a Super Bowl with that 3rd tier. You're just going to need a lot to break your way. That's kind of, I don't want to say Nick Foles in a lot of ways, but Joe Flacco maybe would have been in that solid tier, had I done this, years and years ago. And then, the Ravens defense was special. The special teams created big plays, especially in the Super Bowl, Jacoby Jones. And they had enough pieces around him to where they elevated his play, and he went on a 4-game streak. So maybe he does go into the back end of that really good with sprinkles of elite because he did put together a great postseason. Same thing with Nick Foles. But realistically, I think those 2 guys would have fallen in a solid, maybe not Foles that much, but all I'm really trying to say is top 2 tiers. I think you can put yourself in Super Bowl contention category with those type of quarterbacks. And then once you get into the solid, it's like, yeah, it could happen, but you're going to need a lot to go your way. So anyways, moving on to the next quarterback. Mac Jones is going to be the first that we put in this average department. And, he was the most pro-ready and in a lot of ways was the best rookie quarterback we saw last year. And I think that's kind of where we'll continue to see him. I think some of the second-year quarterbacks will start to move ahead of Mac Jones, but at the same time, he'll just be solid, dependable, smart, good head on his shoulders, middle-of-the-road type of quarterback. So we'll see. Hopefully he takes a step forward, but for right now, he certainly falls in that average department, especially when you think about, second-year guys. Will they take a leap forward? I think Mac Jones has already got ahead of some of the guys coming into this season, and the question about Mac Jones is how much better will he actually get from that point onward. And then we get to Ryan Tannehill, and obviously this is such a tough one to kind of categorize, and I'm going to put him in the solid. He might end up being in towards the back half of this solid category, if you will, especially considering the last we saw of him wasn't great in that playoff loss to Cincinnati. You look at that, and it's like, okay, well, now this team's moving on from A.J. Brown, so it's only going to get worse around him. And to lose Roger Saffold, that interior offensive line isn't looking great. Todd Downing, share your thoughts with him as an offensive coordinator. I'm not overly fond of him. Don't think he brings a whole lot that's dynamic to the table. But Ryan Tannehill is fine. Like, don't let that one playoff game totally disrupt your outlook on him because he has gotten better once he got to Tennessee. Now, some of that's Arthur Smith, some of that's Derrick Henry. There's a lot of competing factors, but he is solid. And in a lot of ways, when I was coming up with this, this headline and title for this section, need a strong supporting cast, and it's kind of that 1 in a million, lightning in a bottle type of, quarterback with a great team around him. They can win a Super Bowl. Ryan Tannehill feels like the exact example I would use for that type of quarterback. Now, granted, Tennessee and that supporting cast around him isn't as good as it once was, so the Super Bowl window in Tennessee is certainly feeling like it is closing. Then we get to Baker Mayfield. Baker, we'll put him in this average tier. I think he can start. He's a top 32 quarterback, and again, we'll rank these as we go throughout. For right now, if I was heading into next season, I'd probably rather have Mac Jones over Baker Mayfield. Some of that's the baggage, right? Like when you look at the personalities of these two, it can be a little different, to say the least. So I think that's kind of where my head is at, but that's also where it's kind of difficult with Ryan Tannehill. But if you were to put me in a vacuum, same team for all these teams, I think I'd feel more comfortable with Jones just ahead of Baker and maybe Tannehill edging him out just a little bit more because, once he got to Tennessee, he's been pretty fun to watch and he's been really, really good up until that playoff game. Then we get to the Jared Goff. This guy's just not it. And I mean, I've had some Lions fans actually really aggressively tell me they're not going to draft a quarterback next year, to which I would respond with, so is Goff your guy of the future? Because congratulations on your road to mediocrity through the Dan Campbell and, Brad Holmes tenure and era. So you've got to do better than Jared Goff. He's fine. Again, a top 32 quarterback, but is he a top 28? That's where the conversation kind of takes you. And he's not young. He's really not growing and getting that much better. Goff is a starter, but not much more than that. Kirk Cousins, what holds me back about Kirk Cousins, and I think he'll be the top guy in this solid tier, is statistically he puts up some great numbers. Now, I think that Kubiak, as their offensive coordinator, and that scheme in and of itself is a little stat friendly. And also felt like Mike Zimmer and, big moments, especially third and longs. It was check down, don't turn it over, we're going to play it safe. Sometimes they were playing a little too conservative with Kirk Cousins. Now, is that him? Is that the system? Is that the coaching staff? I'm not in the building. I can't speak to that. But so I don't know. He's kind of a tough one because you look at the numbers and the production. You're like, yeah, you could win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins. But when you put the eyeballs to it, he leaves a little to be desired. And some of that's on that conservative side that, maybe the coaching staff have forced him to play within. So I'm putting him towards the top of the solid category. And part of that also coincides with Kirk Cousins has kind of been known and kind of gained this, notoriety of not playing big in big games. So if he's able to put together a couple of big performances in prime time, maybe pick up a couple of playoff wins over the next year or two, he could totally move into that really good with Sprigs of elite department. And probably not further than that, but maybe the middle of that tier. But for right now, I think he's going to be the top of the solid department for me. Jimmy Garoppolo is exactly what comes to mind when you think of a placeholder, stopgap quarterback. And, Goff in a lot of ways has been that for Detroit, but I think Garoppolo at least wins games, right? And you could say Goff did that with the Rams. I think that's a really special situation. Garoppolo, when we got to see him a little bit in New England, that wasn't a all-world type of supporting cast, but got the job done. Granted, small sample size, totally understand, but even right when he got to San Francisco and, that first time we get to see him playing, that team's not all that good, but they start winning games towards the end of the year, and he looks really good. So he's something about him. He finds a way to win games, so I'll give him that little bit of an edge over Jared Goff. Then we get to Matt Stafford, and this is exactly who comes to mind. Like what I was saying about Ryan Tannehill in that solid department, needs a perfect situation around him to where it could all come together and they can win a Super Bowl. Matt Stafford is immediately what comes to mind with really good sprinkles of elite, and we saw it last postseason. 4-game stretch where he put together an elite showing throughout the postseason, not without its faults, right? There's some near turnovers, and, history could have played out a lot differently. Ask Jaquiski Tart what could have become, especially considering the Rams win the Super Bowl, and, maybe the 49ers had a chance to do it, and maybe that changes our complexion on Jimmy Garoppolo and company. That's a what if to talk about later, but, Matt Stafford's this guy who, you look at him, he's a top 12 quarterback. He's got the talent. I've always been a big fan of Matt Stafford and his arm strength and his ability to create when there really seemingly is nothing there. And, sometimes him looking for big plays, he can force the issue, and that's kind of where the turnovers can come to a rise. He did lead the NFL in interceptions last year, so that kind of speaks for itself. But he's also a guy who, when playing his absolute best, can be an elite quarterback and take you to a Super Bowl. And we saw that last year. Tua Tagovailoa, I'm going to put him in the average tier for right now, and I'll put him right next to Jimmy Garoppolo. It almost feels like he's kind of becoming the left-handed version of Jimmy, maybe with a little bit more mobility. But these two, especially now with Mike Daniel, feel like they might be linked for, at least the next couple of years. But it'll be interesting to see what Mike McDaniel can get out of Tua. But for right now, he's a young quarterback that hasn't taken that step forward. And right now, the returns have been, average. So, he fits kind of perfectly with this tier. But I do think there is an opportunity. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mike McDaniel and company, offensive line improvements, where maybe he moves into that solid tier next year. You would really hope if you're a Dolphin fan, you could at least say Tua moves into the solid tier next season. But, maybe it all really comes together. And this is the best situation he's had. And it all kind of clicks. And Mike McDaniel makes the game easy. Maybe he moves into that really good tier. So something to look forward to this upcoming season for the Dolphins. And then we get to Dak Prescott. And I'm going to put him in that really good sprinkles of elite right next to Matt Stafford. I could certainly be convinced that Dak over, Matt Stafford. But for right now, especially considering the, last handful of games towards the end of the regular season for Dak Prescott, not necessarily as good as it was for the first maybe 10 weeks of the season. Pre-calf injury and post were certainly two different versions of Dak. Now, he didn't have a big game against, Washington and Philadelphia in prime time, but the Eagles were resting their starters, and Washington was literally self-imploding in that game with Jonathan Allen and Jerron Payne fighting on the sideline with cameras pointing at him. That was, kind of the absolute lowest point of the year for Washington. So take that big game with a grain of salt, though he did show out that there is something that deserves to be credited there. But I'm a big fan of Dak Prescott. He is one of the smartest guys at the position, and what he does pre-snap feels like it makes Kellen Moore's job that much more easy and allows him to get kind of creative. That being said, Dak and Kellen Moore will have their work cut out for them. No Amari Cooper, who's one of the smoothest route runners in the game, and it's going to be a rookie wide receiver playing on the outside, opposite of Jalen Tolbert, who's obviously coming off an injury. So when will we see when will we see Michael Gallup? The advantage, though, you still have CeeDee Lamb, who has inside-out versatility, and you can move him around a ton, so that will be the focus for Dak Prescott as well as Kellen Moore. Then we get to Teddy Bridgewater, and, kind of like what we talked about with, Jimmy G. He is textbook placeholder, quarterback 32 through 30. You can start him, it's fine. It's not going to lose you games, but he's not going to do anything special to win games either. So we'll put him right behind Tua, as right now he is Tua's backup. Jalen Hurts, another really good example of being solid. He is fine. Double checking and reviewing what I had done before, I have Hurts over Tannehill, and I must say I've been a little biased to Jalen Hurts and his journey, because you look at him when he was at Alabama to where he was at Oklahoma, I saw growth. I saw a better football player and a better passer of the football. And then from Oklahoma to Philadelphia, when we finally got to see him replacing and taking over for a benched Carson Wentz, I saw growth there. From those 4 games to the next season as a starter, I saw growth, and I still think there's something more to tap into with his skill set. And as he gets more and more comfortable with his receivers around him, I think the chemistry is there between him and Devonta Smith. But now you add in A.J. Brown, a clear-cut number 1 wide receiver. That makes Smith's life easier, but also Jalen Hurts. So I'm really excited. I think next year, maybe not the really good with Springs of elite type of category, but maybe he's right there next to Kirk Cousins, because there's going to be some more names and faces that populate this list. But maybe he overtakes Kirk as the number 1 solid quarterback. So still think there's something to tap into there with Jalen Hurts, and I like Nick Sirianni. So that's a really fun, duo there to watch this upcoming season. Justin Herbert. I'm actually going to have Herbert edge out Matt Stafford. So between those two LA quarterbacks, certainly close, but I'll also take Herbert with comfort over Dak, at least as of right now, and kind of predicting where I think his growth and progression will take him into next season. But the arm strength's there, the mobility's there, we've seen the accuracy. Kid's got it all. Now they just need to have an offense that kind of forms around him and get into a spot where LA can really maximize what he brings to the table, because there's not a throw on the field he can't make, and there's no reason why Justin Herbert really shouldn't be in the elite tier. And I even kind of kicked around having him, and we'll go ahead and jump ahead to Joe Burrow. I'm going to have Burrow just ahead of Justin Herbert. And those two guys, without a doubt. Like, if you look at the really good with Springs of elite, Russ through Herbert, without a doubt, could move into that elite conversation next year if it's another year of dominance from Burrow, and maybe Herbert gets into the playoffs, wins a playoff game, and still looks really good while doing it. And Russell Wilson just kind of turns his clock back a little bit, just as Russell Wilson evolved. All those guys could easily make an elite conversation in my eyes. So they're all knocking the door. That's why they're this really good tier, and they're really at the top of it. But the reason I have Burrow just ahead of Herbert, what did he do in the postseason? What did he do as a leader of that team and galvanize their postseason run? So I'll give Burrow the slight edge despite the physical tools. And, I'm a big Justin Herbert guy. I want to have Herbert over Burrow, but what we've seen on the field, and especially as a leader and postseason success, you got to give the edge there to Burrow. Trevor Lawrence, I'm going to have at the very top of this average tier. One of these quarterbacks I think is going to take a second-year leap. And Trevor Lawrence, from a talent perspective, is the most likely candidate there, so I'll give him the edge and move him up to the top of this category. Number 1 overall pick for a reason. Presumed number 1 overall pick for, 3-4 years for a reason. Talent's there, and I'm really excited to see what Doug Peterson can get out of him. And not that everyone wants to bring it back to the 2017 Carson Wentz Philadelphia team. I really hope Doug Peterson isn't really thinking like that. I hope he's thinking, what can I do for Trevor Lawrence, as opposed to how can I make Trevor Lawrence into Carson Wentz? Because I think that's really where the conversation needs to be geared towards. One, for Doug Peterson to have a successful tenure in Jacksonville, because that coincides heavily with Trevor Lawrence's success. But I also think that's just the best case scenario for Trevor Lawrence. Justin Fields, man, this is tough. I would want Fields over Mac Jones and a Baker Mayfield heading into next season, with total acknowledgement that you could look at next year, especially with what's around Justin Fields, that Jimmy Garoppolo maybe has better numbers, or maybe Baker Mayfield ends up being a starter somewhere, puts up better numbers and has better production than Justin Fields. But part of my thinking going into this was, okay, I'm thinking about next year. There are going to be guys that, Zach Wilson's another good example when we get to him. I will have him over Jared Goff, while Jared Goff might have better numbers next year. I'm not trying to predict who's going to be the best and most productive quarterbacks. It's just saying, hey, if I had an NFL team and it was the same for all 32 or 32 plus names on this list, who would I want? And, I'll buy into the risk-reward proposition of a Zach Wilson over what I know is going to be fine quarterback play in Jared Goff. So kind of a similar conversation. I'll take Fields over Jones. I had him higher on my board. I'm going to stick to that evaluation. We're only 1 year into each of their careers, and the upside's there for Fields. While, the floor is certainly on the side of Jones and Baker, Jimmy Garoppolo. Similar conversations we had. Fields could certainly be worse next year, especially given the team around him. But I think if I had a team and it was the same for all these guys, I would want Fields and I'd want to try to figure it out. And I think he brings more to the table if he hits his peak than the guys behind him. Moving on, Kyler Murray, another guy who kind of encapsulates what it is to be really good, sprinkles of elite. And, between him and Dak, it is definitely close. I'll give, I'm going to keep them side by side. Maybe I'll give Murray slight edge. Both these guys were certainly in the MVP conversation. Maybe Murray a little bit more than Dak last year, especially first 10 weeks of the season. Again, these two guys before their injuries were a lot better than what they were after. And you know what? I'll go ahead and move it. That playoff game, I think, is what trumps me to have Dak just over Kyler. Kyler did not look good against the Rams, and that's really tough to have that be the last taste in your mouth from watching a football player. So, we'll move him just below Dak. But those two guys, big seasons ahead, where if they could put it together for 17 games, they too, just like, Wilson, Burrow, Herbert, this is all very fluid and it's in flux. If they put together a good 17 games, there's no reason the talent's not there to have them in the elite tier. So, those two guys could definitely move up, but I need to see it for a full 17 for each of them. Sam Darnold is not it. If you want to hear me talk about it more, just hit me up on Twitter. I don't know. Sam Darnold's not good. I'm sorry. Matt Ryan. I'm going to go with, especially at this point in his career, he was once pretty good with sprinkles of elite, but for right now, let's have him just behind Kirk Cousins and a little ahead of Jalen Hurts in that solid department. And that's kind of what Indianapolis has been trying to build. They tried to do something similar with Carson Wentz, maybe trying to bank on, a step forward as he's reunited with Frank Reich, and they don't need an absolute perfect roster around him, but now it feels like, hey, Matt Ryan's getting old. We understand that. We need to have a really good roster. But, he's a veteran option. We got him for a third-round pick, and he's better than Sam Ehlinger. And he's an upgrade over Carson Wentz, for that matter. So it makes a lot of sense for why Indy would make that move. But, I think they even understand we got to have a really special team around Matt Ryan if we want to be Super Bowl competitive. Lamar Jackson, without a doubt in my eyes, really good sprinkles of elite. He won an MVP for a reason. He could be in the elite tier next year. So, big fan of Lamar Jackson and everything he brings to the table as a dynamic player with his legs, but also he is improving as a passer. Look at the first 6 games and how many deep bombs he was hitting to Hollywood Brown. Now, that brings up an interesting point in and of itself. What does that offense look like without Hollywood Brown, who is the number 1 wide receiver? What does that look like? We'll have to wait and see. I'm expecting more out of Rashad Bateman, and I'm also a big fan of Tylan Wallace, who they took in the 5th round last year. And Tylan Wallace is this big play, downfield, vertical wide receiver, and a lot of what he ran at Oklahoma State where it goes in post, and maybe that's the translation. Tylan Wallace just becomes maybe a nerfed version of Hollywood Brown in that offense, but we'll have to wait and see once we get a training camp. But I'm a big fan of Tylan Wallace, and I think Lamar Jackson opens up that passing attack with everything he can do with his legs, especially once they get that running back room a lot healthier than it was last year. Taylor Heineke is a backup quarterback, and backup quarterbacks are fine. I kept him on as a tier here for a reason, because realistically, football, you're running into people. There's lots of contact. There's going to be injuries, and the way I kind of approach this, and I will layer and rank that tier, is based off of, let's say my starter goes down for 4 games. In what order would I want these guys starting? So that's going to be kind of the focus moving on. Then we have Daniel Jones, and if memory serves, and it does look like I did, I have Daniel Jones at the top of the not it tier. I really want to buy into the hype of Daniel Jones, and go back on videos earlier in this channel, especially early on, maybe the first 4 to 6 weeks last year. I think he was playing better than a lot of people wanted to give him credit, especially considering the offensive line ahead of him was putrid. The wide receiver room really was not living up to snuff, especially with my preseason expectations, because I'm a big fan of Kenny Golladay. But that being said, that stretch of the season didn't tell the entire story. It did take a step back from that point onward. Then he gets hurt. He's always battled with turnovers, specifically fumbles. He is a good athlete, so him wanting to use his legs and the fumble concerns, not a great marriage, but maybe if he's able to clean up some of the ball security and be able to keep a tighter grip on the football, and then because the offensive line's gonna be better, maybe the wide receivers figure it out, he could definitely move up into the average at least, maybe even in the solid tier if he has a really good year with Brian Daboll, who I think is another big factor in this. Working with Jason Garrett's a lot different than working with Brian Daboll, right? Their resumes would speak for themselves. So right now at the top of the not it tier. Don't think he's a starting quarterback as it stands right now, but I can certainly have my opinion change on it there because, this is definitely the best situation he's stepping into going into a year. Jacoby Brissett, yeah, I'd take him over Taylor Heinicke. Part of it is like risk reward. Like Taylor Heinicke for 4 games might give me like one really good game, one fine game, and then 2 where just his performance 100% will limit me from winning a game. Jacoby Brissett through those 4 games is going to be fine. He's going to be average. He is not going to win nor lose me anything. So I think I'd rather, play with the devil I do know rather than the one I don't in that situation. And then, Drew Lock, I actually had him in this not it tier just ahead of Sam Darnold. But those two could certainly be switched. But part of that is just, I don't know why, but I've been really anti-Sam Darnold of late. Davis Mills, I'm going to put in the average tier. He's a young quarterback that we're waiting to see what his year 2 leap looks like. So, he was a 3rd-round pick for a reason. He was one of the lower QBs on my board, a draft back because didn't get to see a whole lot of him at Stanford, despite, the high recruiting profile coming out of high school. And, last year, some of the returns were good. I mean, of the rookie quarterbacks, Bill Belichick's had a awesome career against rookie QBs, and he's got some unbelievable numbers against that type of situation and against young quarterbacks. Davis Mills cooked him up for over 300 yards, 3 tutties, and, even the last game of the season against the Titans, he looked pretty okay. So there might be more to tap into than what I think, but he is going to be on the backside of this average because I'm going to stick with my evaluation and see him as a more than likely career backup quarterback. Cam Newton, he's fine to fill in. When it comes to him and Brissett, I think I'd take Brissett. I don't know. That one's tough. Maybe I'd take Newton. But either way, not to harp on it too much. We're getting into the nitty-gritties here. But maybe I'd take Cam over Brissett. But it kind of comes down to, again, Brissett's stable. I know what I'm getting. He and Case Keenum. Case Keenum actually not on this list, funny enough. Those two in a lot of ways just encapsulate what I would want in a backup quarterback, where it's just like, don't sink the ship. I don't need you to, raise the sails and take us to new heights. Just don't sink it. Don't send us to the bottom of the ocean, please, and thank you. And, Cam last year, obviously tough situation coming into Carolina off the streets. Returning to Carolina, it was awesome. But, Matt Rule, and especially after he fires Joe Brady, that's kind of the team that Cam Newton's stepping into. The offense looked lethargic from a play calling standpoint. And it just didn't really come together for Cam. And, they're subbing him out, bringing in P.J. Walker. It's a weird spot to find himself in. So maybe I take him over Brissett, but it's definitely close. And I kind of prefer the sturdiness maybe of Brissett. Andy Dalton, he is a backup quarterback. We'll put him up ahead of a Heinicke. And Dalton's, fine. And, maybe you like Dalton over Brissett. I'll give Brissett the edge right now. But Dalton, somewhere between quarterback 36 and 32. He's one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league. Again, we're not going to touch Dwayne Haskins. Rest in peace. That's a really tough story. Geno Smith, I actually think, is a pretty decent backup quarterback, and I'll put him right next to Jacoby. I think, similar to what I was talking about Jacoby Brissett and Case Keenum, who, if Case Keenum's on here, he's the top backup quarterback in this tier. But man, Geno Smith can be stable, and honestly, the little bit we got to see him fill in starting for Russell Wilson didn't look all that bad last year. So I think he's a solid, capable backup quarterback, but he might be starting this year, which is kind of the quandary to find yourself in if you're Seattle, because you look at the 2 quarterbacks that are leading the competition. It's primarily a guy you think of as a backup or the guy who I think is not in. So maybe go make that trade for Baker Mayfield if you're Seattle. Mike Glennon. I mean, without knowing anything about football, without even looking at these guys and knowing 100% of their names, Mike Glennon I feel like is the most easy to ID because of that neck. He is going to be the last backup quarterback. Sorry, man, but wasn't pretty last year for the Giants. Marcus Mariota. I think in a perfect world, he is a backup and a high-end backup, but in this case, I actually think I'd take him over Teddy Bridgewater to start a couple of games, and I'd take him over Davis Mills right now going into next season, which, Mills, I'm figuring there's going to be a little bit of progression going into year 2, but still my evaluation was he's a late day 2, early day 3 quarterback and more than likely a career backup. Mariota, I think, again, I feel like I've been saying this a ton, 32 to 30. He's probably in there in that starting quarterback range. He's fine. He can start games, and because of his mobility, he can make some things happen, but all in all, it's probably not going to be anything much more than that. Ryan Fitzpatrick, actually, I'm going to have as my top backup quarterback because for whatever reason, this guy goes scorched earth anytime he's coming off the bench. So give me Ryan Fitzpatrick as the top backup quarterback. Mitch Trubisky, he is not it as a starter. I'll put him just ahead of Locke and Darnold. Yeah, him and Goff are right next to each other in my eyes. maybe you want Trubisky out in front because he's more recently been a top 5 pick versus Goff, and the mobility's there. Sure. If you want to move Trubisky up ahead of Goff, I can't fault you there. And then only a couple more names left. Derek Carr, really good sprinkles of elite, and I'm actually going to put him right next to Matt Stafford, just ahead of Dak and Kyler. And again, this is all fluid. I'm not saying definitively Derek Carr's going to have a better year than those other guys, but I think last year was a really good case in point of like what Derek Carr brings to the table. One, as a leader, right? Like everything that went on with the Raiders season last year, John Gruden, Henry Ruggs, David Arnett, you name it. Derek Carr was the guy at the front of the ship, him and Rich Bisaccia, keeping things under control, keep that building from going up in flames. Because, wow, I don't know if we've ever seen a team go through that much in a single year. And Derek Carr played a really, really good season, for, I want to say, the first 10 or so weeks, led Pro Football Focus charting and, big-time throws. The guy knew how to make big plays, despite really Darren Waller being their only real, legit number one weapon. Henry Ruggs did a whole lot when he was on the field prior to his, terrible incident and, taking the life of a young lady and her dog. But he represented a field stretcher, and he had some big plays, but he really wasn't a number one, not like a Tyreek Hill with that speed. And, Bryan Edwards is traded to Atlanta Falcons for a 5th rounder for a reason. It was really Darren Waller, and, Darren Waller even had his injuries last year, so Carr did a lot with a little. And, there were, especially the first 6 weeks of the year last year, he looked like an elite quarterback. He was legitimately playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So really good sprinkles of elite, and we got to see that last year. Zach Wilson, again, this goes back to what I would want to see. You know what? Just because of the upside, I'll move him ahead of Mariota too, because if I'm going into a season, if Wilson isn't it, I'm going to find out pretty quick that we're going to win 3 or 4 games, and I'm going to know I need to move on. But if it works out, and maybe he takes that step forward, and his problems last year weren't really anything we saw at BYU, so maybe it's just a comfort thing, and he needs to get more acclimated to the NFL and get used to the Michael LaFleur system. Whatever the case may be, maybe he takes a step forward and he's a top 16 guy. That, with the work that the Jets have done this offseason, that's a scary team that could, put themselves in the mix and, maybe win a couple games that turn some heads and put themselves in the hunt as we get later and later in the season. The Jets have always been one of those teams where it's like, the in the hunt graphic really starts to become a thing around week 8. And by like week 10 or 11, the Jets kind of fall out of it. Maybe next year they're alive until week 14, 15, or something like that, if Wilson, of course, takes that leap forward. But, going into a season, I would take that risk-reward proposition over what I know is going to be fine quarterback playing Marcus Mariota and Teddy Bridgewater. And I will take his risk-reward proposition over Davis Mills just because I think the ceiling's a little higher with the floor being around the same basement level. Jameis Winston. This is where it gets tough. I'm going to put him in the solid tier right next to Tannehill. You could convince me to switch these, especially taking into account what we saw with Jameis Winston starting last year. He looked really good until that injury. And, as the year started to go on, the turnover plays started to become more and more frequent, and his urgency and desire to push the ball down the field became more and more apparent. But that being said, he still felt like a really nice mix of what he wants to do with what Sean Payton wants to do, and they kind of found a nice equilibrium. We'll see what that looks like with Pete Carmichael. It's obviously not Sean Payton calling plays anymore, but Carmichael should keep it at least similar enough, but the play calling aspect of itself is challenging, so that might hurt Winston's case here. But with what New Orleans is building, we're going to find out the answer to this question, because they added Chris Olave. I think he's a NFL-ready wide receiver, and especially as a number 2, Michael Thomas comes back healthy. He's got what it takes to be a number 1. He's the single-season receptions leader for a reason. The offensive line, while losing Teron Armstead, Trevor Penning's gonna have his struggles, but James Hurst is the solid swing tackle. Maybe they're starting him and working on Penning in the time being. So the offensive line feels fine. Not gonna lose you games maybe, but it may not be as elite as it once was. And the defense is still in a healthy spot with Dennis Allen stepping into that head coaching role. He'll still be the defensive coordinator. He's had a ton of success in that role. So we're going to find out this year. He's going to have a really solid supporting cast around him, offense, defense. Hopefully Alvin Kamara is playing the full 17 as well. So we're going to find out. But as I look at it right now, I think he would be the very last quarterback in this solid tier. Him and Tannehill. It's certainly close between those two. And then Carson Wentz. Man, what do we want to do with the hot dog here? He does bring a fair amount of upside to the table. But if I were heading into a season, maybe just ahead of Zach Wilson, the floor probably isn't as low, but they both had their turnover concerns. And the hard part about Wentz is, like, he'll make a couple throws in a game. And, he did this in the playoff run with Philadelphia, not 2017 where he was looking like the MVP, but years after, right before his complete and utter downfall the last year in Philly. But he had some throws in their postseason run where it's like, man, this guy can just do some stuff that one play was elite. That one throw was special. But then also his turnovers, or when he tries to throw it left-handed against Tennessee, it becomes a pick six. And it's like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? So there's a couple flashes of awesome, but there is a whole lot that is really bad. So I'd probably take him a little bit over Zach Wilson, but not by much. And honestly, I'd rather see what Tua becomes. And part of that is like safe versus upside. I'd almost think if I had a fine team around it, Tua could be okay and we could be competitive and maybe around 500. Carson Wentz with an okay environment around him could make us 6-11. So maybe I'd lean Tua there and hope that he takes a leap in year 3. But that's going to do it for my quarterback tier ranking. I'm going to take one final look at this, and I believe I already ranked this in the order that I would rank the quarterbacks. So take a screenshot. This is basically my 1 through however many quarterbacks in here with, of course, the rookie quarterbacks not really being a part of the factor here because I just don't know what they're going to look like. Maybe I'll do an official 1 through 32 later on this year. Let me know what you think about that video idea. Give me some video ideas in general, but also tell me what you think of this tier ranking. Where would you have these quarterbacks? Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Love to have your thoughts down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me and my channel out a ton. If you're new around here, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button for more sports content in your life. That's good for me. Until next time, my name is Teach, and I am signing off.